Hello and welcome to the second episode of Carbon Lab, Made Affairs podcast, where we talk about material science and climate change, and in the first season, plastics, a super impactful material. And while I am not a scientist myself, luckily, I have Dr. Olliver Gould with me. Olliver leads the R&D department as head of research and innovation at Made Affairs, and he has over 15 years of leading scientific research and published over 35 scientific papers and patents.
And lucky for me, I'm joined by Barnabas Horvath, who is brand and marketing manager at Made Affairs. He is an ex-journalist, marketing professional, and most importantly, a science enthusiast.
Thanks, Oliver. And with that, let's roll our intro, our new intro, I can say, made by our very own Michael. I guess let's just jump into the topic.
I would love to. So for me, plastics are so interesting and fantastic and have been so societally successful, largely because of their versatility. So they are these fantastic materials that can be everything and anything that you possibly want them to be. They can be conductive, they can be insulating, they can be transparent, they can be opaque, they can be as tough as steel, they can be soft and malleable and all kinds of things. But why is that? I hear you asking, Bob.
Almost. Now I was just thinking about insulating, we talked about last time, right?
Yeah.
How they helped us have widespread electricity everywhere. They replaced ivory and other pretty hard materials.
Yep.
And we can see them all around us, really in any shape and form and a lot of use cases. And now I'm ready to ask you, why is that possible? How is that possible?
I think fundamentally it comes from the sort of versatility of that molecular structure of this long chain. And it turns out that the range of things you can do with that molecular design is very big. So again, I have to give some examples. You can make them semi-crystalline. And I think this is probably a big part of what made plastic successful. And we talked a little bit last time about this phase transition, right? This ability to have something that's solid or liquid, depending on the processing conditions that you put it into. And this semi-crystallinity is really key for making thermoplastics, one of the most widely seen categories of plastics. So almost everyone listening and almost everyone in the world will be interacting with something made of a thermoplastic probably at this moment. And that basically means that these polymeric materials, these plastics, have small regions of crystallinity within them. So different chains, so the chains within that plastic, these polymers, have normally something that can overlap or something that can form an ordered structure. Normally part of the plastic material will be amorphous and part of it will be crystalline. And these crystallites will be dispersed throughout the polymeric material. And what they do is they provide strength. So they provide a means to adjust the strength of the material depending on the environmental conditions you have it in. For humans on planet Earth, we like things that are solid at room temperature and pressure, so ambient conditions.
Yeah.
And the plastics that we see, that we have around us, are solid because they have these small crystallites dispersed through the matrix. However, and what's fantastic, is that we can remove those crystallites by heating the material up. So if we heat it above its melt transition, we can turn it into a sort of much more fluid-like material.
This is where the whole word plasticos comes from, right? If I remember it correctly, this phase change. And what you're talking about, these different structures and things, you mentioned quite a few times in our last episode, Hermann Staudinger.
Exactly.
And he was the person who basically was very adamant about these molecular structures and plastics being long chain.
Exactly, yeah.
This sort of very deep level of changing the material comes from his work and that understanding of materials, right? So that's why we are able to do all these things with it.
Yeah, for sure. It's that basic design motif around these long or these large macromolecular chains, these long units of chemicals, right?
And basically that means that not we, but more like you and scientists can decide that, okay, I need a chain that is going to be, I don't know, this strong and this whatever you want, or I want something that is going to be transparent and softer.
Exactly.
Like you're talking HDP now and LDP, right?
Yep. Exactly right. And then I can change the individual atoms that make up that chain, but still have that design motif that makes something a polymeric material. So maybe I put in carbon atoms, maybe I put in fluorine atoms, maybe I put in something else. And this sort of brings me to a really good example of a very magical, high-performing material that also has some interesting societal implications, which is fluoropolymers. So fluoropolymers, many people will know, and we'll get onto that, they are this fascinating type of material that has these really magical properties. And just a quick historical scene setting, which we love, which I love. So
we all do.
to understand fluoropolymers, and PTFE is a good example, which I'm sure lots of people have heard of, which is polytetrafluoroethylene. I will set a scene. We're in 1938, and a chemist working for DuPont, also a very well-known company, Rory J. Plunkett, was attempting to make a new chlorofluorocarbon refrigerant, CFC, as many of you may also know.
That's the bad one, right?
Also some slightly problematic ozone-related business. So he was using tetrafluoroethylene gas in a pressure bottle and basically discovered that the gas pressure went to zero. But what was especially interesting, or because he had a very curious, inquisitive mind, he noticed that the mass of the bottle was still massively more than it should be, given that it was reporting as empty or there was no pressure anymore. So what he did, again, thanks to a deep curiosity, was that he sawed the bottle apart. So he cut into it and chopped it into two pieces. And what he found was that the bottle's interior was coated with a waxy white material. And what he noticed immediately is this waxy white material was very slippery.
Again, something goes wrong and the scientist
realizes... I know, so we're getting back to the theme of something going a bit weird or going wrong. And, Anyway, so he carried out analysis on this white waxy material that was slippery, and he found that he had polymerized perfluoroethylene, and that was what was inside the container. So on the basis of this, a company called Kinetic Chemicals patented this new fluorinated plastic, which was similar to the already known polyethylene at the time in 1941, and then registered the Teflon trademark, again, which I'm sure lots of you know, in 1945.
This is so surprising to me that Teflon is also a plastic.
Yeah, well, the reason that Teflon is maybe so widely known or widespread or attains such economic success is because it has these really remarkable properties that were pretty much unparalleled at the time in anything, any natural material, anything anyone had seen. And one of those key properties was that it was extremely resistant to chemical attack. So you could throw whatever you wanted, harsh acids, harsh environments, at this Teflon material and it wouldn't degrade. And that's very rare, certainly among many biomass-derived materials at the time and several other polymeric systems. And it was so good that, for example, it was early on it was used in the Manhattan Project.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
As a material to coat the valves and seals in the pipes holding highly reactive uranium hexafluoride. So straight away, this magical material is finding applications in things that no other material would be suitable for. But where it gets more mainstream and more interesting is that in 1954, Colette, I'm going to definitely pronounce this one, Gregoire, wrong, urged her husband, a French engineer called Marc Gregoire, to try the material he'd been using on his fishing tackle on her cooking pans. As a result, he rubs this PTFE material on her saucepans and notices that they have these amazing non-stick properties, that nothing will really stick or burn or cause problems in the same way that lots of other materials do when cooking, as I'm sure you know, Barnabas.
I am the owner of one Teflon pan.
Nice.
Exactly one. And I do love it.
So anyway, so fantastic are these non-stick properties and so useful is this for cooking that they then created the first PTFE coated non-stick pan under the brand name Tefal.
Tefal, yeah. That brand I also know.
Yeah.
They are very common.
Which comes from combining the words Teflon or Tef from Teflon and Al from aluminium. So in the United States, someone else, Marion A. Tlozolo, who'd been using PTFE on scientific utensils, then marketed the first US-made PTFE-coated pan called the Happy Pan. And I don't know really where that name came from, but pan that makes you happy.
It made people happy, right? Because it was easy to clean.
Burning your food anymore, so you were happy. So anyway, the Happy Pan comes out in 1961. Teflon sort of really starts expanding. And part of the reason of the success of the Happy Pan and why PTFE is so amazing in these applications is that it has an extremely low coefficient of friction Specifically, it has the third lowest coefficient of friction of any known solid material. The first two are aluminium magnesium boride, in case you're interested. I'm sure you are.
Could be useful. If I ever go to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or something like that, I will.
And the second being a diamond-like material. So low is the coefficient of friction of PTFE, and so high is its resistance to van der Waals forces that, fun fact, it's the only known surface to which a gecko cannot stick. So if you take your gecko at home and put it in your frying pan, Barnabas, and hold it upside down.
That sounds very bad either way. I don't put my gecko in a frying pan.
The gecko will fall down.
Poor gecko.
Poor gecko indeed. So really, like this is a magical material, which is what I'm trying to convey here. So it's often used in ski bindings, for example, to reduce friction. It's also used very commonly in textiles. So PTFE coats or rainproof materials. Gore-Tex is a brand incorporated expanded PTFE. All of these are polymeric systems, and all of these are based on that original fluoropolymer discovery.
So the thing is that we have this one material, and I guess it can be said for all other polymers that they are very good at one thing that almost no other thing can do.
It's hard to say. Like, part of the success of Teflon and lots of polymeric materials is the variety of applications they're suited for. Like Teflon is fabric, it's saucepans, it's lubricants, it's seals.
So whenever you need something that's non-sticky, because it's a very good example, because I do remember having like bicycle chain loops with Teflon, but it's also in my clothes, and it's also on my pan, and it's also wherever.
Yeah. So like I go back to it's the versatility that makes it work. It's the ability to process it as well. So we can make all these different things and use it in all these different applications because of that processability, which goes back again to the phase change point. Mm-hmm. The idea that we can easily, for most polymeric materials, change the phase or manipulate the form that they're in because they have this molecular design motif associated with a long chain.
And you can stick it to other things. I mean, the non-sticky thing,
broadly. But you can reconfigure its structure, right? You can have a certain chemical design, a certain molecule, and you can reconfigure it by changing the conditions and make it into all kinds of other things, which is a massive limitation for a lot of natural materials. But, and here, this is the big but. So
this is the but when the happy pan becomes
the happy pan
unhappy pan.
We've heard a lot about how, Teflon has these really magical properties that really caused it to be super popular and super mainstream and distinguish itself in lots of applications. The but is that Teflon is kind of magical. We again spoke about the low coefficient of friction, but also the resistance to chemical attack. So part of the reason we can use it in saucepans is that it doesn't thermally degrade. We can heat it up again and again and again and expose it to lots of different chemical environments, and it will not break down. But there is a great problem associated with having something that doesn't break down. And while short term we see fantastic benefits, the longer term picture is slightly different. And I think one of the reasons that fluoropolymers and Teflon is so interesting is because we as a society are starting to appreciate that problem.
Yeah, this is what they call forever chemicals, right?
Yes, sort of. So forever chemicals is a bit of a umbrella term, as you might expect. And I think we should caveat here by saying that we are making a bit of a generalization. There are lots of different chemical forms of fluorinated materials. And the most commonly known forever chemical is actually another fluorinated material that's associated with the manufacturer of PTFE rather than the PTFE itself.
Okay.
But nevertheless, just for the sake of this podcast, let's be a little bit broad and sort of say we're treating most fluorinated materials similarly. So we have this thing that's extremely resistant to decay, that doesn't break down, right? And going back into the sort of history a bit, we're at a place in 1947 where 3M, another company you almost certainly heard of, then the Minnesota mining...
Sticky notes company.
Exactly.
And everything else. They do everything, but sticky notes.
But then known as the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company. So 3M are producing perfluorooctanoic acid by electrochemical fluorination, don't worry about that too much, in 1947. And DuPont is purchasing this material from 3M for the manufacturing of specific fluoropolymers, commercially branded as Teflon. Maybe it's slightly historically relevant for anyone looking this up. DuPont are internally referring to the material as C8. And then a long time after, there is increased scrutiny around the health effects of these materials. But the real problem is that we have this sort of nasty cocktail of something that has this potential toxicity coupled with something that has this extremely high stability. So something that basically lasts forever. And that is where we come to the name forever chemicals, right?
Yeah. So what you alluded to is that there are studies that suggest that these materials might be carcinogenic. None of us is a medical scientist, but it doesn't matter if they are or they are not. They are here with us forever.
Exactly.
So they might have any effects and they are stable for hundreds of years and they stay in nature where they should probably not.
Exactly, that's it. And there have been some sort of reasonably prominent court cases around specifically the dumping of fluorinated materials by DuPont and others. These numbers are the matter of public record, but an industry assessor, for example, in 2004 reported that over 1.7 million pounds, that's 770,000 kilos, for all our metric fans out there. C8 had been dumped, poured, and released into the environment from DuPont's Parkersburg, West Virginia-based Washington Works plant between 1951 and 2003.
You always say that we can engineer these materials and they are so amazing. Why don't they degrade? Why don't we do something to them that makes them degradable?
We have traditionally made synthetic materials without really a view on what we do at the end of their life, where they go. And as a result, we've, in some cases like Teflon, made these things that are basically last forever, are the most unbelievably chemically resistant. And then we end up with them in the bloodstream of every single person on Earth and at the top of Mount Everest and everywhere.
Sorry, do you think, I mean, from a marketing point of view, we might edit this out, but I find it really interesting. Like if I try to sell something as a marketing person and I say that this is forever or like this is a very sturdy material, that sounds really good for the consumer, right?
Yeah.
Because, oh my God, I only have to buy it once and it's going to be with me forever. But the reality of it is not, I'm going to throw it out at some point. So I'm not trying to blame the consumer because that's the shittiest thing to do ever. And I really hate when companies do that and shift the blame. But it's kind of like makes sense in a very bad way that it's good that it's forever, while in reality, it's not really.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, like in the broadest sense, we are all part of, a societal system, and our societal system has, for whatever reason, prioritized making high performance materials without thinking about what we do with them at the end. We've made things that are very stable, that last forever, that we can say, look how robust your jacket is, or look how long this pan will last. You hear a lot the discussion about biodegradability. Why don't we design synthetic materials that can break down, that don't have the longest lifespan? And people do. People make biodegradable materials. There are lots of things on the market. But I just wanted to spend a little time talking about why that isn't an easy solution for lots of reasons. And the basic reasoning behind that is that natural processes are complicated and difficult to control. So it's very hard to design something in a way that we can control and know and understand how it breaks down in a natural environment. It could go into the sea. It could go into a glacier. It could go into a jungle. And the sad truth of it is that if we don't know very accurately what that environment is, it's very difficult to design a material which breaks down in a safe and non-problematic way.
So to put it very simply and dumb it down a lot, we would have to design a different PET bottle for Norway and Vietnam and Ghana and whatever, potentially, because it's just a very different place, very different humidity, temperature, and place where it lands.
Exactly. And I think the other solution is that if you have a very controlled end of life. For a lot of materials, where you either design things for a very specific environment, but really the only way to get that specific environment is to collect, is to put things through a specific end-of-life pathway, with recycling, with reuse, with something like this. And that's the only way we can really know and control what we're doing and what that material would end up as. If you don't do that, if you do expose things to the wider world, the wider ecological environments, what you end up with is often, in many cases, things that generate microplastics, that generate fine dust-like particles that will maybe decompose into methane, or maybe decompose in a different way to something even more harmful.
By the way, I was thinking that, this collection thing is tricky because I recently moved to Berlin and I had to relearn how to sort my trash.
Yeah.
So I guess it's very hard to come up with solutions that are like universal.
What I'm sort of trying to come to as well is that the problem that the problem is never materials in a way, or like in lots of cases, it's not materials. I want to say like materials don't kill people.
Oh, wow, man.
Society does.
It is an inanimate object, right? So
it's an inanimate object. And, materials have all these wonderful properties. I'm a materials scientist. I am extremely evangelical and the biggest advocate for synthetic material design there is. But we can't solve what are largely societal problems around our material use by necessarily just making new materials. The problems associated with recycling cannot be solved by making a biodegradable material that circumnavigates recycling processes or proper control of end of life, because those things largely don't exist.
There is one material that seemingly is good with end of life, or at least with recycling, and we also talked about it as aluminum. There are stats going from 75 to 85% is still in circulation for all aluminum produced ever, which is a ridiculously good number. Plastic usually gets around 5 to 7% based on the source you try to quote. Doesn't really matter if it's 5, 8, or 10, because it's definitely not 75. Why do you think there is this huge discrepancy? Because you say materials are not bad, not good. We theoretically could do it, yet we don't.
Aluminium is a really interesting example. And I think it largely comes to, again, a bit historical context. And we have to, again, go back in time a little bit. But the fundamental differences to me are in some way rooted in the differences of how we treat synthetic versus natural materials. And we talked a bit on the last podcast in a similar direction, which is this idea that really synthetic materials exist as a way to valorize something that was previously waste or not valuable. And really going into sort of the First World War and the Second World War, the most valuable materials were natural ones. And we invented synthetic materials because we couldn't gain access to those natural materials. We had this material scarcity that came as a result of this wartime environment. So things like Bakelite, some of the other plastics and polymers that we talked about before, they came about as a result of us needing replacements for silk, for ivory, for all kinds of things. And I think we still a little bit have this perception, or maybe just in our societal system, we have these deep ingrained ideas that synthetic materials are low value. And there's a little interesting aside here. There was historically in the sort of early 20th century this idea that, or maybe this proverb, that you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. It's saying you can't make something valuable like silk out of like a pig's ear, a waste product, essentially a biomass waste product. And then there was a US firm in 1921 that I think mainly for the marketing clout decided to do just that. And they took a load of sow's ears and essentially broke them down to form a sort of adhesive-like material, which they then spun into a fiber and created something analogous to silk. I mean, I think that's just a good way to think about what synthetic materials represented at that time and for a lot of their development in sort of mid and early 20th century, which is this idea that like you were taking a waste product, something low value, and you were transforming it into something that could do something. But it's still low value in a way.
Yeah, in comparison, since we talked about aluminum, it was a very expensive material, right? At certain points, it was more expensive than gold. Legend says that Napoleon III gave out aluminum cutlery to the highest level guests instead of gold. Maybe that's another reason why they came up with proper recycling methods for it. And as you said, the idea of plastic being cheap and plastic being plasticky as a negative adjective. In my childhood, having a faux leather shoe or having faux leather shoes was a very bad thing. It was like, you can't afford leather. And also, We talked about this too, like very recently, at the beginning of smartphone era, a lot of companies like Samsung and HTC used to make smartphones with plastic backs. A lot of comments were about the internet. Oh my God, it's so cheap. It's not good. It's not premium. And Apple did the glass back. And now all companies make the glass back. And I could argue that objectively, glass back is not better than plastic. And plastic can be high quality, can be premium, can have a very long lifespan, and it doesn't break like glass. And yet a whole industry decided glass is the way to go because it's just nicer.
It has an association with quality.
Yeah, it doesn't feel cheap.
Yeah, and I think, obviously recycling is a massively complicated issue, and societal treatment of materials is massively complicated, and there's a huge range of socioeconomic factors that affect all kinds of things in that direction. But I do think it's interesting to sort of consider the history of synthetic materials and their context when we consider why we treat some things in the way we do, whether it be with foam leather, recycling.
And if it's cheap, why would I recycle it, I guess I can just make new ones. As we discussed, these are like sort of or quasi forever materials. So you can't just dump it out and like see what happens because, well, we know what happens. We see it right now.
If we develop the processes, if we invest enough time and resources, you can do anything. Like you can make anything you want. You know, the reason we have a lot of recycling of aluminium is because we invested during wartime a huge amount of money in recycling programs and processes to recycle aluminium. I mean, I agree there are economic factors there and the whole thing isn't, so easily directly controllable, but by and large, it's like up to us. I guess what we're coming to here as we sort of wrap up is that this idea that synthetic materials and new materials can be this like fantastic source of change and can be this fantastic source of humanity, of technological progress. And the big caveat to that is that we need to have the right priorities, or we need to have this more ecologically minded view of what our materials are doing, and maybe a more societally broader view of what our materials do and how they function in the wider world. And we heard about what happens when that goes wrong, when we make these forever chemicals, these chemicals that are extremely stable with different fluorinated polymers and materials that can last for all of time and do not break down at all.
And that way of thinking was probably very much missing of our collective minds up until very recently. We were living in a moment and there were debates about climate change and all sort of things. And we are just realizing now that oops, we might have to actually pay attention to the future, and we can't live up all our resources now, and we just have to change.
Exactly. And I think, with everything that we understand about climate change and the wider implications of humanity on the world and Earth as a planet, we have a tremendous opportunity to make better materials and to do things with advances in chemical synthesis and material science to really make a difference, and to make something that really allows us to continue as the human race on Earth.
Because Earth is pretty cool. I like it here.
I like it. I'm a fan.
It's the best planet I know. Yeah.
9 out of 10.
Okay. With that, let's end it. And in the next episode, we are going to talk about exactly that. What we can do about our materials, mostly plastics, how we can make them better. And with that, let's wrap this up. Thank you for being with us on another nerdy journey. Don't forget to share and like what we do here on the podcast or on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Have a nice day. Bye.
See you next time. Bye.